Right, we finished the first part of the introduction, which is a general introduction to the Shisha Sidra Mishnah and the name of Mishnah and the history of Mishnayos. Now we're going to look in particular at Zera'im. Zera'im is the first chelek of the Shisha Sidra Mishnah, and we're going to start Brachos, which is the first Masechta. However, we need to understand why Zera'im is where it is. Why do we start off with this particular chelek of the 6 chalokim? It's well known that the seder that we have is Zman Nokat. That's the Rashi Tevas, Zayin for Zera'im, Mem for Moed, Nun for Noshim, then Nun again for Nezikin, and then we've got Kuf for Kodshim and Tes for Taras. There are other possible arrangements. There are shittas which put Nezikin at the very end, and there are other names for the different Sedorim. For example, Nezikin is sometimes called Yeshuas. But we are going to concentrate on Zera'im as the first. What gave Zera'im the Zechus to be the very first of the Shisha Sidra Mishnah? And how did it come about? Well, if we look at the Makairos, which we mentioned last time, for where the Shisha Sidra Mishnah come from, we'll see that Zera'im becomes first. If we start off with Shabbos Daf Lamed Aleph, we said that there was a posuk which the Gemara brings from Yeshaya, which says, "V'hoya emunas itecho." The word emunas represents emunah, and the Mefarshim suggest that Zera'im becomes first because Zera'im represents emunah. Why does Zera'im represent emunah? Well, Rashi and Tosas in Shabbos there each give their explanation. Rashi says that the emunah of a person is dependent upon him bringing his maisras and giving his tithes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rashi's lashon is emunas ha'odam soimech lahafrish maisrosav karoi. Rashi is saying that a person who has emunah will give his maisras, he'll give his stocker, he'll give out to other people and won't keep it for himself. That represents the emunah, and that's a cardinal principle of Judaism and Yiddishkeit, that you rely upon HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we will give our produce to other people. Therefore, Zera'im deserves to be first. Tosfos says that a simple explanation: a person who sows in the field has emunah that 9 months later the seed which is sowed will actually produce a crop. You have to believe that, because it doesn't look as though you're just throwing your crop away into the ground, and yet it comes out again afterwards. That teaches us the same thing as emunah b'Hashem. Just as you put your seed into the ground and have faith that it will come good many months later, so also a Jewish person has to have emunah in Hashem. And Zera'im teaches us that, and that's why it becomes first. That's Tosfos Shita. Marshah in the Chidush HaGodos in that same Gemara gives another explanation. He says that we know that Brachos is going to be the first of the Masechtas in Zera'im, and there's reasons for that. When we come to start Masechtas Brachos, we'll have to explain why Brachos comes the very, very first of all the Masechtas of Zera'im, because you make a bracha on all the produce. We'll see that Brachos deserves to be first, but Brachos represents the fact that we have emunah, in as much as before we do anything, we make a bracha to Hashem. And when a person makes a bracha, everybody has to answer Amen, and we have a principle, Godel ha'oina Amen me'a mavorech. The person who makes the Amen is in fact a higher zechus than the person who makes the bracha itself. Amen is emunah, and therefore it was right that Zera'im should be praised first for that reason. That's the Marshah's suggestion. If you look at the other psukim which we quoted as being the source for the Shisha Sidra Mishnah, remember the Medrash Tehillim said it was from the Torahs Hashem Tzimimah, and from the various psukim in that Mizmar Yud Tes and Lam Natseach, and the Mefarshim suggest that the word Eidus is the word which represents Zera'im, and therefore that is an Eidus for Hashem. That's how Zera'im is connected with that particular pasuk. As far as the Baal HaTurim's explanation, which he brought the pasuk in Devarim chapter Chavov, Hashem Hemar Hayom, the relevant pasuk for our purposes is the very first one, which says, Liyos locho leilokim. That represents Yiras Shomayim, and therefore that's first in that particular pasuk, and it's appropriate that Zera'im should be first accordingly. So we're seeing from these different sources that Zera'im is connected with Emunah and with Yiras Hashem, and therefore it was placed first in the Seder. The order then goes on with Moed and Noshim, etc., but we're going to concentrate on Zera'im, and Brachos was placed first in Maseches Zera'im. There are various explanations given for that. We've already mentioned the fact that Brachos is the Masechta, which represents Emunah. It's, in fact, takes precedence over all the Zera'im, that you have to make a bracha on whatever you do. But more than that, Brachos starts off with the most cardinal principle of our faith, which is Kriyas Shema. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad is the essence of the whole Torah. So it's Rabbi Akiva wanted to keep that all his life, B'chol Nafshecho, and the beginning of our day starts with Kriyas Shema. The first mitzvah we have to do every night is the mitzvah of Krishma for Ma'ariv. The first thing we have to say in the morning, we have to say the Kriyas Shema. So therefore, Brachos was absolutely ideally suited as the opening Masechta, which we are going to have to have in Zera'im, Zakdama to Zera'im. Brachos becomes most appropriate for the introduction to Mishnayos. There is perhaps one final point which I could suggest as before we just start Maseches Brachos, and that's to dealing with the beginning and the end of Mishnayos. As is well known, very often it is appropriate that the beginning and the end should be tied up. It's remarkable that the first letter of Shas, the first letter of Mishnayos, is a mem, and the last letter at the end of Uktzin, at the end of Mishnayos, is also a mem. What's the significance of this mem business? Well, one answer is the mem is 40. 40 represents shleimus in Torah. You know, Moshe Rabbeinu was in heaven 40 days and 40 nights. We know that wherever you come across the number 40, it represents a perfection in Torah, and therefore it was appropriate to start and finish with the letter mem. Mem for Me'emasai and mem for Hashem V'Shalom. That's one explanation. The second explanation is that the letter mem is the middle letter of MS. And if one were to take the Torah Shebiksav, which should have started with an Aleph, but the Medrash says it didn't start at Bereshit with an Aleph because the Aseret Dibros hadn't yet been given, the Torah hadn't been given, but when the Torah was given it started with an Aleph. That started with an Aleph of Anochi. The Aleph of Anochi and the Mem of Memasai, and then you take the first letter of Gemara, which is a Tov, Tana Hechakoi, you have MS. As if to tell us, this is the centrality of truth, this is the MS. And just as in Bereshis itself, you find the Sofei Tevos, Bereshis Bara Elokim, have the letters MS, and the second and third and fourth word, Bereshis, this is Bara Elokim S, have Sofei Tevos MS. It wants to introduce the letters MS into Torah Shebiksav. Similarly, Torah Shebal Peh starts with the Mem being the central letter of the MS, being tied together with the Aleph of Anochi and the Tov of Tanech HaKoi. And there's more to it than that, because the first word of Shas, Me'emasai, has in it MS. The word Me'emasai, actually, the central letters are Aleph, Mem, Tov. As if to tell us, this is the true way to proceed. There's a lot of remozim hidden behind the pshat in the Mishnah and the halacha of the Mishnah. The Rebbe, when he did it extremely clever. He did it with Ruach HaKodesh, and therefore we have to pay attention to every little item which is in the Mishnah, and there are all sorts of interesting remozim just from the letters themselves and how we how they're set out. So we're going to start next. We'll start with Meseches Brochos. We've already now made a Haschola. We've done the first letter. It's said that the Vilna Gaon could have spent his whole life only on the first word of Bereshis, and similarly on the first word of Shas, of Meimosai. One can spend a whole lifetime on it. We have to get on through the Shisha Sidra Mishnah, but from now and then it doesn't hurt to learn a little bit about the breadth of the Torah and the Ramazim which are behind it. So we are starting with the Mem of Meimosai. We've learnt the word Meimosai, and then we'll continue with Brachos from here on.